News at 10.
A Russian missile strike on a crowded shopping centre just as Western leaders meet to support Ukraine. 1,000 people were inside the complex as it went up in smoke and flames in a Ukrainian city far from the front lines. In the last few minutes, the G7 leaders meeting in Germany have condemned the strike, saying attacks on civilians constitute war crimes and vowing not to rest until Putin ends his war on Ukraine. Also in News at 10 tonight. Gasps of shock and anger as former Prime Minister John Major describes the blood contamination scandal of the 80s as bad luck.
Knowing that our government brought them products from America, that's not bad luck, that's irresponsible.
The heroic neighbours who risked their lives to save members of their community caught up in a Birmingham gas explosion.
We just essentially started digging them out of the rubble. We managed to save him as the fire was getting closer and closer. We managed to get him out of the building onto the mattress.
Now, a leading black player in rugby goes public with his shocking stories of casual, everyday racism in the game.
One more Andy Murray win to add to the century of centre court stories.
And Brits back on centre court at Wimbledon as Andy Murray and Emma Raducanu win on day one.
This is ITV News at 10 with Raghi Omar.
Good evening. Remember the name Kremenchuk, a place in the central region of Ukraine far from the front line of Russia's invasion. And yet, today, its citizens going about their daily lives suddenly became the targets of war. More than 1,000 people were said to be crowded inside a shopping centre there when, without warning, it was blasted by a missile strike and engulfed in flames. President Zelensky's immediate and horrified reaction was to say the number of casualties was unimaginable. At least 13 people are dead, many injured. G7 leaders at their summit in Germany issued a joint statement just in the last few minutes, condemning what they called the abominable attack, which came on the very day the Ukrainian leader had addressed them. Boris Johnson said it showed once again President Putin's cruelty and barbarism. Tonight, the dreadful task of looking through the blackened embers of the shopping centre is underway.
On the day world leaders met to demonstrate their support for Ukraine, Russia again showed it is bent on this nation's destruction. A missile strike on a shopping centre, engulfed in towering flames. The daytime attack ensured it had been crowded, with perhaps 1,000 innocent people inside, according to local authorities. While rescue workers battled the fires, inside, survivors described scenes of horror, of walls beginning to fall in. Some managed to make their own stumbling way through the smoke and the chaos to the fresh air outside. This government official said emergency services were clearing the wreckage as quickly as they could. The roof, he said, had collapsed, and a search was underway for the living and for the dead. Dozens more were injured, many seriously. The attack happened in the city of Kremenchuk, far from the front line, but home to a major oil refinery. This evening, President Zelensky said the shopping centre was of no strategic value. He accused Russia of sabotaging people's attempts to live a normal life. It all follows yesterday's strike on an apartment building in Kyiv, the first attack on the capital for 3 weeks that left one dead and several injured. And in the east of the country, intense fighting continues. Ukraine still has troops in the city of Lysychansk, its last significant grip on the Luhansk province. But at huge cost, the Russians are closing in. 4 months into this war, and there is no easing of the pain or the suffering. Ukraine needs its international partners now more than ever before. John Ray, News at 10, Ukraine.
Well, Ukrainian officials have called the missile strike an act of terror by Russia. It's hard to find any other reason for it, with today's attack coming as world leaders gathered at the G7 summit in Germany. It gave a terrible urgency to President Zelensky's plea for more help, more equipment. The G7 leaders pledged support, in their words, for as long as it takes.
The joint session with Ukraine's President Zelensky came just hours before the horrendous news from Kremenchuk. But even before this latest outrage, the summit here was remarkable for the solidity of their backing for Ukraine. Gone was any talk of pushing Kiev towards a negotiated settlement. Instead came promises from President Biden that for the first time advanced air defense systems were on their way, and that if this war is to end, Zelensky will decide the terms.
What's really struck me in the last couple of days has been the amazing consistency of our resolve, the continuing unity of the G7. That was absolutely shone through in the conversation over the last couple of days.
We've heard this before from the Prime Minister, of course, but now even the once cautious German Chancellor is completely on board.
We understood that the policies of all our countries are very much aligned, and this is, I think, the good message, that we are taking tough decisions, that we are also cautious, that we will help the Ukraine as much as is possible, but that we also avoid that there will be a big conflict between Russia and NATO.
There are significant costs to this tough line, of course, to the world economy and to food and energy prices. Many of those costs falling hardest on some of the leaders from the developing world invited to attend this summit. Russia has been banking on an economic crisis that breaks Western resolve. So far, at least, that calculation has proved to be wrong. Boris Johnson has led the condemnation of today's attack, saying it will only strengthen the resolve of both the UK and the G7 to stand by Ukraine. But they will all know that days like this only make their task harder. On this last evening of the summit, Schloss Elmau in the Bavarian Alps has been battered by heavy rain and thunder. The planned leaders' barbecue may have been just another victim of what are proving to be very stormy times.
Well, stormy times, as you say, James, and you join us now from where the G7 leaders are meeting. There was strong condemnation from them about that attack tonight, but what more have they been saying?
Well, like them, we've been driven indoors here by this tremendous thunderstorm. I hope you can hear me over the pounding rain, but they have issued a statement in just the last few minutes in which they say indiscriminate attacks on innocent civilians constitute a war crime. Russian President Putin and those responsible will be held to account. And they go on to say that we will continue to support Ukraine for as long as it takes. So it's not clear why this big step up in attacks has happened to coincide with this summit, but whatever the reasons for the attacks in Kiev last night and in Kremenchuk today, they don't seem to be working in terms of damaging Western resolve. The talk that there was in both Paris and Berlin that recently that maybe this war needs to be brought to an end because it's doing so much damage to the democracy and the economy elsewhere, you're not hearing that anymore. And interestingly too, these leaders, 6 of them at least, will be going straight on from here to the NATO summit in Madrid tomorrow. And there's going to be a very significant announcement that the troops who are kept on standby, 40,000 of them, rapid reaction force by NATO, that's going to be increased 8-fold to 300,000, with many more being based on the borders of NATO in Eastern Europe.
All right, James, good luck with the battle with the rain. We can hear you. Thanks very much indeed. The former Prime Minister, Sir John Major, came under heavy criticism for remarks he made today at the inquiry into the contaminated blood scandal of the 1970s and 80s. Sir John drew gasps from those present when he described what happened as incredibly bad luck. Many campaigners take a different view after the deaths of around 3,000 people who had received imported blood products infected with HIV or hepatitis C. It's been called the worst treatment disaster in the history of the NHS.
I was 8 years old and had a swollen knee and I was misdiagnosed with haemophilia.
It's been over 4 decades since Stuart McLean was given contaminated blood which he didn't need and which no one told him had given him hepatitis C. When he finally found out a few years ago, it nearly killed him.
I just thought Hep C, everywhere I looked online, it went to the worst possible scenario. Lost my career with depression, lost everything basically, nearly lost my life. I stood at Motorway Bridge to end it all.
A passing neighbour dissuaded him, but Stuart is one of up to 30,000 people given contaminated blood by the NHS, and thousands have since died. Giving evidence, this former Prime Minister drew gasps of disbelief by suggesting misfortune played a part.
There's no amount of compensation you can give that could actually compensate for what had happened to them. What had happened to them was incredibly bad luck, awful, and it was not something that anybody was unsympathetic to.
But the risks should have been clear. The NHS began importing blood products from the US in 1972. Just 2 years later came the first warnings of contamination and hepatitis. By 1983, the UK government had been told AIDS was being spread through them. But it was 1991 before American blood products stopped being used. For Stuart, bad luck doesn't begin to cover it.
And he calls that bad luck, knowing that our government brought them products from America? That's not bad luck, that's irresponsible.
Mark Ward was given the same blood products as a child with haemophilia. By his 20s, they'd given him HIV.
If you ignore AIDS, it could be the death of you.
Just as public health campaigns like this were stoking fear. He feels he's lived with government complacency for decades, and today was more of the same.
He was in charge of the country whilst we carried on dying, carried on being infected, and he never asked why. That's nothing to do with luck.
Away from the inquiry, these vials hold not blood but messages to those who've died. A reminder that whatever the outcome, for too many, it will be too late. Rachel Younger, News at 10.
Today's strike by barristers may not have caused the widespread chaos that resulted from the recent rail strike, but it has worsened the backlog of unheard cases in the criminal legal system, and with more strikes in the pipeline, the prospect of worse to come. Today's walkout was the first of 14 days of action planned over the next 4 weeks in a dispute over pay and conditions. It's claimed many junior criminal law barristers, for instance, currently have to get by on pay that's below the national minimum wage.
With the wigs and the placards, they were among the more surprising of picket lines. But despite what some might think, their case to the government today was many barristers don't earn enough to live on. Among them, Rosalind, whose fees are set by the government through the legal aid system. She tells me she used to earn more as a barista in a cafe than as a barrister at court.
I was on a job on the minimum wage before this, and I cannot maintain the lifestyle that I had then. Now, I'm going to have to look at other jobs to financially survive unless something really drastic changes.
It's because while a barrister may receive £90 for a single court appearance under legal aid, that doesn't include many hours preparing for the case. It leaves new junior barristers earning around £12,000 on average, though later in their careers half will earn the equivalent of a £60,000 salary. There's already a huge backlog of cases in the courts. Ministers say today's disruption will make that worse. But barristers argue that backlog has been caused because so many of them are leaving the profession. Charities say victims of crime are the ones really suffering.
Victims are waiting 4-5 years to have their cases heard by the courts. In that period of time, they're living with the trauma, the fear, the anxiety of what they've experienced. They're unable to cope, they're unable to recover.
The government says it's already proposed a 15% increase in legal aid fees, which would add £7,000 to a typical salary. But barristers say it won't kick in quickly enough and more strikes are planned.
The key price will be paid by some of the most vulnerable people in our society, victims of crime waiting longer for their cases to be heard. So my message would be, consider the fact we've put this very generous offer on the table.
But many barristers say they're having to look elsewhere for higher paying private and civil cases, leaving the criminal justice system just when it needs them the most. Ben Chapman, News at 10, Manchester.
Tributes were paid tonight to the bravery of several members of the public who risked their lives to pull an injured man from the rubble of a collapsed and burning house. A woman has died and a man is seriously injured after the home in King's Standing area of Birmingham was wrecked by a gas explosion. One of those who went in described to us how the cries of the injured man could be heard from beneath the wreckage.
A home now lies in fragments, possessions strewn across the street. The cause, a gas explosion. Those who were nearby at the time are still shaken today.
I was driving past outside the house, and at the same time it just exploded, and I had my kids and family with me, my wife, and it was really scary and it was shocking.
My whole vision pretty much went white. All you could hear was the boom, obviously. Parts of the building flew about 20 foot in the air and 40 foot outwards.
House is gone now.
The blast happened just after 8:30 last night. Neighbours immediately ran to help and risked their own safety when amongst the debris they saw signs of life.
So I hopped over a fence and saw this hand sticking out of the rubble, and I shouted for more help. A few more people arrived after that, but we just essentially started digging them out of the rubble. We managed to save him as the fire was getting closer and closer. Managed to get him out of the building onto a mattress.
The injured man is critically ill in hospital. A woman who was also in the property at the time has died. The fire service and gas teams are now investigating what caused the explosion. Natasha and her family have been allowed home quickly to get some more clothes. Last night they had to leave in a hurry.
He said to me, "But is it safe in here?" And then all of a sudden the police come up and they're kicking us out and evacuating us. We were in pyjamas and literally throwing out with no shoes on. I had to grab their shoes on the way out, and yeah, it's just sheer panic.
The rubble and ruins will eventually be removed, but the scar left on this street will take longer to fade. Ellie Pitt, News at 10, King's Standing.
A man is being held by police tonight on suspicion of murdering a woman as she walked along the street. Detectives say they believe Zara Alina, who was 35, was attacked by a stranger in the Gants Hill area of East London. She died after being found with serious head injuries in the early hours of Sunday morning. A 29-year-old man was arrested in Ilford earlier today. Just months after a parliamentary inquiry spoke of deep-seated racism in cricket, new revelations are tonight threatening to engulf another major sport. A former England rugby star is making shocking claims about the racism he encountered on a day-to-day basis, even from teammates. Luther Burrell, who won 15 caps for England rugby union side between 2014 and 16, has spoken out about the racist jokes and so-called banter he had to endure throughout his career. He says such attitudes have no place.
He played 15 times for England, and his professional rugby career took him to 4 Premiership clubs. But Luther Burrell has never talked publicly about the racist comments he endured. Now he says it's time to speak out.
I've been my own worst enemy because, you let one comment slip that you perhaps think, oh, maybe I've just kind of overthought about that comment.
He says the worst moment came when he and teammates discussed using sun cream on a hot day, and one of them referenced slavery and shackles.
When someone mentions the word shackles and slave as a bit of banter on the back of putting sun cream on, when the word slave's getting chucked around, there's a line. Trust me, you've well overstepped that line.
The reaction inside the game has been supportive, with rugby bosses both apologising and applauding Burrell for going public. Bill Sweeney, the chief executive of the Rugby Football Union, said he was disturbed that this has been Luther's experience, while Simon Massey-Taylor, the chief executive of Premiership Rugby, said it's a reminder of how far we still have to go.
Luther Burrell said the experience of cricketer Azim Rafiq helped encourage him to go public. The racism he reported led to an upheaval in the way Yorkshire Cricket Club was run. But Burrell hasn't specified where the offensive comments, including the N-word, were made, preferring not to name names and ruin careers.
I sort of lost a bit of my integrity by behaving in that manner. And now I just don't want anybody else to be in that situation. I've got 2 children. I've got a daughter and a son that both love rugby. So I'm doing it for that generation.
Burrell's been offered a meeting with RFU executives as they try to turn the negative publicity into a positive driver for change. Ian Woods, News at 10.
Next tonight, a pilot scheme we've learned about which could have major future implications that's being launched by the Welsh Government. From the start of next month, around 500 young people leaving care in Wales will be offered a wage of £1,600 a month across 2 years. First Minister Mark Drakeford told us that the Welsh Government's basic income pilot scheme could be the first step towards helping generations to come. Opponents say such free money schemes don't work.
For most of us, turning 18 is a much anticipated milestone. But for those leaving care like Rhian from Carmarthenshire, it can be a daunting experience.
I was really nervous because obviously growing up in care, and as soon as you sort of come up to 18, you're in control of your life. What am I going to do?
Unable to work due to the trauma of being abused as a child, Rhian became homeless. Now 22, she thinks a basic income would be hugely beneficial.
They'll be able to have that little bit of money to be able to start off in life and to be able to learn how to pay their bills properly.
Tomorrow, the Welsh Government is launching a basic income pilot for 18-year-olds leaving care. A lump sum from the state every month with no strings attached, rich or poor, working or unemployed. In theory, a universal scheme reduces the financial burden on taxpayers and simplifies the benefit system. But that depends on it being truly universal, something this scheme isn't.
The Welsh Government simply wouldn't have the resources to mount a universal, citizen-wide scheme of this sort, and in any case I think there is lots to learn from doing it on an experimental basis.
Around 500 care leavers will be given £1,600 a month for 2 years once they turn 18. After tax, that works out at just under £1,300. That means that in total they'll be given nearly £31,000 over the 2 years. Critics don't oppose supporting care leavers, but say £20 million could be better spent.
It's been tried in other parts of the world, Finland for example, and after a short period of time they brought it to an end because it wasn't achieving the results. Welsh Government have a very full in-tray that they should be prioritising, and Universal Basic Income Scheme is not one of the things at the top of their list.
That pilot in Finland was with jobless people, and it found that a basic income did not lead them to find work, although they did feel happier. Other experiments with the concept include a small town in Canada, which saw significant health benefits, but also a reduction in hours worked. For those a part of this pilot, they see the basic income as a way to move on with their lives.
I'd like to go to uni. I want to do youth work, and it'll just help out so much.
I've gone through stuff where other people haven't, so it's a big opportunity.
The benefits to these young people are clear and the ambition is laudable. What's not so clear is what this will tell us about the viability of a truly universal income. Rhys Williams, News at 10, Cardiff.
Now, despite the horrors being inflicted on their homeland, as we were seeing earlier, by the Russian invasion, many Ukrainians who fled across the border yearn for the day when they can return. Even the youngest, the children. Peter Smith returned to a border town in Poland he visited in March, which has given shelter and new hope to a group of families. He spoke to the children about the kindness they have received and the pain of missing their own homes.
The tiny border town of Przemysl has been the epicentre of Europe's refugee crisis. Thousands of Ukrainians still arrive every day, but it is in stark contrast to what we saw here in the early days of the war. Masses of tired, cold Ukrainians turned up here, holding a few bags and little hope. 4 months on, we've returned to Przemysl. The Ukrainian children now have homes here and a place in the school, but it still hurts to look back on what they left behind.
I even wanted to cry. Missing my home very much.
Я дуже не хотіла їхати сюди.
I didn't want to come at all.
Батьки казали, що я сьогодні на 2 дня їду.
But my parents told me we are just going for 2 days.
А зав'язали, що на 3 місяці.
And it occurred that I'm here for 3 months.
This was the first school in Poland to take Ukrainian refugees, and back in March we met Vlad on his first day.
Everything is alright in general in Poland, but he misses his dad.
Now we meet 6-year-old Vlad once again.
I do not miss my dad anymore because it happened that he is now in Przemyśl. He came here.
Your dad came here?
Тато приїхав.
Oh, wow. Yes. How do you feel now?
А тепер як себе почуваєш, коли вже тато тут?
Дуже добре.
Very, very, very well.
Coming back here now, I can see how different things are in Przemyśl. The train station is still busy with Ukrainian refugees, but these are not people fleeing their homes, they are now returning. Each day now there are more going back than coming in. People able to return to Kyiv, some here going as far as Kharkiv and Donetsk.
Now I'm going home.
How does that feel?
It's complicated feelings because I'm happy to return and I'm afraid to return at the same time.
I'm very thankful to people who shared their lives with us. It's very, very hard moving.
I'm happy now because come back. I was in Manchester, England.
You were in Manchester?
Yes, my brother lives in Manchester.
On the platform there are emotional farewells with Polish families who hosted them here. But boarding this train to Kyiv, few know what they're going back to, who will still be there, and who won't. After 4 months, home is a changed place. Peter Smith, News at 10, Przemyśl.
The Queen has travelled to Scotland to begin a week of traditional royal events. She was joined by Prince Edward and his wife Sophie at the beginning of the royal family's Holyrood Week. Her presence was only confirmed early this morning. It's the first time the Queen has been seen in public since the Platinum Jubilee celebrations earlier this month. Finally, it's Wimbledon fortnight again, the annual festival of hope and agony for British tennis fans. You could almost hear the collective sigh of relief when Emma Raducanu, whose fledgling career has already had its enough ups and downs to last a lifetime, won her first round match. Remarkable to think this was actually her centre court debut. And for good measure, Sir Andy Murray won as well.
There are few more British sights than this. Resilient and resourceful, this lot weren't going to let a bit of rain get in the way of their queuing. All have been here since the crack of dawn, and many have already travelled thousands of miles, some from as far away as Australia.
What do you think of the weather? Very English. I'm hoping it's going to pass. Yeah.
I need to go back in my cubby.
The rain's not going to put you off?
No, committed. I got up at 4 a.m. for this.
Now, because of COVID, this queue wasn't here last year, and I've got to say, it feels as though people have really missed it. This is the first time since before the pandemic that the tournament's been back at full capacity, and that means they're expecting 42,000 people a day.
Inside, British number one Cameron Norrie got things off to a great start with a straight sets win.
Cam Norrie is through.
And then was the moment we'd all been waiting for. Emma Raducanu may be the US Open champion, but this was her first outing on Wimbledon's fabled centre court. And after a run-up mired in injury worries, Raducanu reminded us all what she's made of.
Absorbing contest.
An ecstatic crowd watched as she beat Belgian Alison von Uytvanck in straight sets.
I love playing on the big stages, big occasions. I think that instead of, like shying away from it, I really thrive in that. And it's special to come through the first round because first round's always tricky. There's definitely an element of I haven't done this before, I haven't played on centre court.
Next up was a man who knows centre court well. Two-time Wimbledon champion Andy Murray went a set down to Australia's James Duckworth. But despite his recent injury struggles, Murray took the next 3 sets with ease. His victory was delayed by a few moments for this challenge to his match-winning point. A bizarre end to a thrilling day for British tennis, one on which any doubts disappeared. Chloe Keedy, News at 10, Wimbledon.
Hope on centre court. And that's it for now. Thank you for watching. From me and the rest of the team, good night.